Okay, we're at the D Hotel with the Bitcoin Investor Conference, and the title of my talk is Why Hire Bitcoin? I've taken the inspiration of it from a marketing professor at Harvard. His was like, why do we hire a milkshake? And he had been consulting for one of the major fast food chains, and they were trying to increase the sales of their milkshakes, and their own internal division, like they tried everything, quote unquote, and hadn't even moved the needle. And so he came in and he applied this new way of looking at products as the job that they perform instead of necessarily what they do. Like, what's the job that they're performing? Why do people want to hire a milkshake? And in his case, he went and got to the 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night at the restaurant, and he asked everybody who bought a milkshake in words that they could understand, like, why did you hire that milkshake? And what he found was that 40% of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. Kind of weird. The people who bought the milkshakes, come to find out, they were usually engaged in a 20 to 30 minute commute. So they're driving a car with one hand, a donut or a banana or something like that gets the steering wheel sticky. You can't just set it down and talk on the phone. It's a long, boring drive. They're hungry. They need something that sits in the stomach, which, those particular milkshakes kind of do that. These are the reasons they're hiring the milkshake instead of hiring a candy bar or a donut or something else. So what did he do? He got a machine where they could come in and swipe the debit card, get the milkshake, and go. So it was very quick, back in the car for the commute. The commute's kind of long and boring, so he had him add fruit to the milkshake. So you're like going down the road and you get that's interesting. A little bit different. Made it thicker, so it took longer to slurp the nasty thing like through the straw. Let's see, what else did he do to it? Added, like little pieces of chocolate, all this other stuff. Milkshake sales went up something like 700%. Because he figured out why people were hiring the milkshake, and then figuring out how can we do that job better than our competitors. So I want to kind of show how this plays out in these 7 different network effects. Because at the Consensus Conference, both Blythe Masters and the Chief Information Officer of NASDAQ, who had previously been the Chief Information Officer of eBay while they owned PayPal, both, they're like, we're blockchain agnostic, but we think it's going to be Bitcoin because of the network effects. The first network effect, in my opinion, with Bitcoin are the speculators. You buy it for a quarter. I was actually walking around Matt Mellon's fashion show with Charlie Munger's son. And, we're looking at all the cute ladies, and he's asking me about Bitcoin. And he's like, so are you up with Bitcoin? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. He was like, how much? And I was like, well, I'm up about 2x in the last 4 years. He's like, you're only up 2x? And I was like, yeah, I'm up about 2x in the last 4 years, what Berkshire Hathaway's up in the last 40. Let that sink in, 280,000% change. So, there's lots of speculative potential with Bitcoin. I think I was the first person, and then Rick Falkvane over in Europe, about a week later, I had laid out a case for $2.8 million per Bitcoin. That's just 1% of offshore tax haven assets moving into Bitcoin. People desiring to hire Bitcoin instead of hiring a Swiss FACTA-compliant bank to store their assets in. So the speculators. Once the speculators hold Bitcoin, once they've decided to fire the Vincent van Gogh painting or the diamonds and hire Bitcoin, well, merchants, they're going to... who was it? Was it P. Diddy or 50 Cent? Like, all money's money? Like, that's why he accepts Bitcoin? Very, very perceptive. Merchants who are smart will accept money no matter how their customers want to pay. That's one of the reasons I funded BitPay. It's helping people fire Bitcoin and hire some other assets, but it's increasing the network effects and the liquidity of Bitcoin, which helps us have a more accurate price discovery and ability to perform economic calculation. Armory, of course, in order to speculate, you need to hold your private keys, and companies need to hold private keys. That's the reason I funded Armory. We need an exchange, that's Kraken, where the speculators can speculate. And then, the second network effect would be merchant acceptance. BitPay has been doing a lot of that. Once merchants accept Bitcoin, then people will decide to pay for things with Bitcoin solely because merchants accept it. Maybe it's the only way they can pay, like in the case of Silk Road, which you really shouldn't do illegal things with Bitcoin. It's very trackable. And you might end up in jail with a life sentence, which is a bad idea. You can't do much when you're in jail when somebody's got the private keys over your life, right? So it's a bad idea to be doing illegal things with Bitcoin. But once customers are paying with Bitcoin, it might be one of the major ways that remittances are sent to the Philippines, for example, is money is sent directly to the supplier to pay for food that then gets delivered to the people. So, you want to order something, if the merchant accepts Bitcoin, then there you go. I wrote an article for Why Bitcoin magazine about merchant adoption. And Overstock, they can use FedEx and UPS to ship to 200 countries. You only got credit cards in 55 to 60 of these countries. So Amazon, because they're not accepting Bitcoin, have seeded, 3/4 of the countries out there. They're not even going after that market. I mean, that's bad business in my opinion. Also, BitPay takes, and Coinbase, I think, 0% fees pretty much for merchants to accept Bitcoin, which translates into a material impact on the income statement for these low margin retailers. So, they have an economic incentive to accept Bitcoin. Additionally, How to Vanish, it's a very provocative name for a site, but it's really going after identity theft. People, we have so many of the costs of our current monetary system externalized onto the users. The regulators, they don't have to spend 100 hours cleaning up your credit report. They can impose those costs not just on the compliance officers to collect all your information, but then onto you as individuals. You have to pay all that cost when somebody steals your identity. It's very expensive, very much a pain in the neck. And so why not use a merchant that accepts Bitcoin so that you don't have to give over all that information? Like, why hire American Express or J.P. Morgan? I mean, which bank was it that had something like 70 million personally identifying information hacked out of their system? Like, just and there are reverse perverse economies of scale. The bigger database you have, like Home Depot, the more incentive there is for a hacker to go and get that information and sell it on the black market. So the fraud, the chargebacks, all of these things that are endemic, not just the identity theft, which is a real pain in the neck for people, but all these other things. That's a perfect reason to hire Bitcoin instead of hiring all of these other payment mechanisms, which increases the velocity, which ironically I think has a depressive effect on the price in the short term. So let's see. We've gone through speculation, merchants, consumers that pay merely because via Bitcoin merely because they use it, and they might only hold Bitcoin for a few seconds, but that increased demand, especially in large aggregate, increases the price. And since the block reward is denominated in Bitcoins, if that price goes up relative to the fiat currencies and the price of electricity, it provides more economic incentive for the miners. And so the miners mine Bitcoin, which means that our blockchain is going to be more secure or have more proof of work behind it than other alternate chains, which if you want immutable persistence, if you want this read-only database, then that's a very important characteristic for you to have. So the miners come in. Where are the developers going to build? They're going to build on the most secure blockchain. And so we have 4,000 developers working on Bitcoin. I think even Ripple only has like 200 people working on their stuff total. All these other chains out there, you're lucky if you have 5 developers working on it. Whether it's Monero or Dash or like any of these others. I mean, it's just there are no network effects really taking root in any other blockchains in a material manner relative to Bitcoin's. In addition to all the other stuff getting built on top of it, exchanges that integrate it, all this stuff, building apps that use your Bitcoin, all of this stuff, developers, they're going to come and build where the network effects are taking place, which then moves us to the 6th network effect, which we've already seen the CFTC get involved in, and that's financialization. So, if you're going to be holding a monetary asset, whether it's gold or silver or dollars or euros or Bitcoin, there's eventually going to be an interest rate which can be imputed or otherwise calculated by the market for that asset. Now, what's interesting with Bitcoin is that you can instantly verify the quantity and the quality of the Bitcoins directly in the blockchain yourself. You don't need to go look and audit in a COMEX warehouse or in the LBMA, where central banks in their own balance sheets hold gold in the vault and gold out on loan is the same line item. In effect, they report cash and accounts receivable as the same thing. We don't know who owns what down there in the vaults. Germany's asked for their gold. The U.S. won't give it back. The Dutch, after their airline got shot down, they asked for their gold. The U.S. did give it back. It's interesting why. I was actually talking with someone from the Bundesbank. I was like, well, why didn't you get your gold? And he started, dancing. And one of the bankers from one of the major European banks, who was German, he was like, we both know why. And I was like, yeah, you're occupied. You got 60,000 troops or whatever, like occupied, like stationed in your country. If South Korea wants to move out of the dollar, if they want to fire the dollar and hire gold or hire euros or yen or whatever, what happens? A big destroyer gets put out right in the bay in front of the finance minister's house, and it encourages them not to fire the dollar. Nonetheless, the dollar makes up, I think, 62% of central bank reserves. It's down from about 70% in the last 10 years or so. There has been an increased de-dollarization going on, whether it's China or Russia or everybody else. And so this financialization aspect with interest rate swaps, derivatives, we have the CFTC with their enforcement action against Terra Exchange. That's a 6th network effect, which is, just the very beginnings of sprouting. But that's where Bitcoin's, if it's going to become something, that's where it's going to go, which leads us to the 7th network effect. And I think part of the price rise, even right now, not only has it been a 2-year bear market, but Bitcoin has got its first application. It's the seed has just barely started to sprout as a settlement currency, the 7th network effect, which has decades before it could actually be realized. How has it become a settlement currency? Fundamental financial technical innovation by Blockstream with side chains and confidential transactions as rolled out in their liquid product. Bitcoin is now a settlement currency. Eventually, we're going to be able to, trade an oil refinery and all the associated assets with the respective cryptographic keys in the same trustless, provable transaction into the blockchain for Bitcoins. Or we'll be able to trade the self-driving car that's operating autonomously on the Uber network. I interviewed Eric Jennings, he's CEO of Filament. They're working on a big Internet of Things application. All of this stuff settling into the blockchain, settling into Bitcoin. So those are kind of 7, big distinct network effects of why people hire Bitcoin. You might be wondering, like, why am I wearing an Argentine soccer jersey? Well, I think Argentina is a great case. I've gone to all of the Latin American Bitcoin conferences since the very beginning. I'm going to the third one here in first part of December. Even before those started, I was going down to South America on a regular basis to help, entrench Bitcoin and get it started down in these particular use cases. The Argentines, they have three, in Argentina, by the way, Buenos Aires, you either moved there or New York City in 1905. What they have done to their country, which is just so rich with natural resources, huge. What they've done with bad ideas from the Peronistas is really kind of sad. Nevertheless, they have three main things that they, as a society, really value: football or soccer, steak, and paying their taxes. They love to pay their taxes. And so I have some friends that live down there, and they hate Bitcoin, but the easiest way to get pesos to go pay for their steak or watch their football match is to buy it on Coinbase and go meet somebody at the local coffee shop and get a stack of pesos. And otherwise, if you go to an official place, you got to give them your passport and like this, that, and the other. And that's if you exchange like over $50 worth of value, and then not only that, you get the official exchange rate. And when I was talking to some of the people down at the second Latin American Bitcoin conference, one of them runs a hotel in Buenos Aires. And if a guest stays and pays with dollars or euros, they'll get about, at the time I think they got about 1,000 euros like in their hand, in their pocket. If they paid with a credit card, so if they hired a credit card to pay, one, it went through at the official exchange rate. Two, it automatically got taxed. Three, it automatically had income tax, so sales tax and income tax. Then you had the processing fee. So at the end of the day, they would get between 100 and 150 pesos in their pocket if you hired a credit card. Exact same transaction. 85% difference just from the payment mechanism, just by who they decided to hire to do the job. And so, I think Bitcoin is going to solve a lot of problems for people. It's going to enable people to engage in behavior in a much more economically efficient way. And that's going to add value. And because it adds value, that value is going to accrue mainly to the people who, both hire Bitcoin, who speculate on it, and who build out a lot of these services. And if it becomes a world reserve currency level type of instrument, then, it's absurd to think of the wealth transfer that'll happen. Fortunately, my grandmother's got a grandson that cares about her, which you can't say about, a lot of, with what's happened with the disintegration of the family that's mainly been a result of governmental policy, whether it's reducing the denominator through war, or whether it's, I guess, China's worried about their one-child policy. They just kind of turned it to a two-child policy now because their birth rates are such that they're going to be declining. And if you look at the actual demography and birth rates, I think Japan, after 3 generations, basically 16 people become one person in terms of population. That's how fast populations can shrink. So China could go from like 1.4 billion people to 100 million people just in a few generations. And that, those type of that type of deflationary demographic effect is going to be very interesting also. Instead of having development, you're going to have reclamation, like we're seeing in Detroit. Where houses aren't even worth, the houses actually have negative value to them. So you just have all this development reclaimed by nature. So, currently half the world's wealth is stored in real estate. Why hire real estate when you could hire Bitcoin to store the wealth? You don't have upkeep costs. You don't have to worry about these demographic changes, the way that commercial real estate is going to change because of all of the fundamental innovation that's happening. I mean, you look at how commercial real estate and actually real estate prices in general are determined. You look at the economics are based on like a curve on access relative to the economic center, and so how far away from it you get. And in New York, it's very pronounced. Just one subway stop, there can be a big difference in real estate prices because you're 5 minutes closer. When we have self-driving cars that are running on the blockchain, and so now the lawyer doesn't have to spend an hour and 40 minutes commuting from Poway, a suburb in San Diego to downtown San Diego. Instead, he can go get in the car, which is designed just like at the office, and that's when he actually has to go downtown. Well, now, the value of real estate in Poway relative to the value of real estate in Ramona, which is an additional 40 minutes out, that differential in terms of access, it's not, Bitcoin's going to be able to change so many aspects of all these things because, we're going to have Internet of Things and self-driving cars and like your refrigerator will just order its food and it gets delivered by a drone or whatever. It's going to make all of this possible. And so your access and the whole reason the United States has built its infrastructure the way it has is largely because of the technology of the car. It changed that land use curve. That's why we have suburbs and our cities are built the way they are instead of like they're built over in Europe. And so Bitcoin's going to have a transformative effect on that. And so to finish my thought about the world reserve currency, the settlement currency status, I think it's important to understand that price and value are currently completely bifurcated. We don't have a tool to perform economic calculation, as Mises says. The reason we don't have a tool to be able to perform economic calculation is due to governmental interference. This governmental interference has throttled financial innovation. It's absolutely ridiculous that we can track a $5 package, but we can't track a $500,000 wire. We know how much it costs to send the $5 package, and yet we have no idea how much it costs to send the wire, what the fees are going to be. The fees actually get determined after the transaction's done. This is really crazy when you think about it, and just silly. It's just so stupid. And so because of the Federal Reserve System interfering to the degree that it has, and what that's done to undermine the rule of law, because gold and silver, they're not merely commodities. They're essential checks and balances in the political machinery. They stand as sentinels against the confiscation of wealth. They distribute the power over the purse from the sword. And yet we've turned over, as individuals, as citizens, we've turned over the private keys of wealth to the government. Additionally, because we lost the property rights in the past, as Steve talked about, we've also lost property rights in the present with extraordinary rendition and indefinite detention. And we've also lost property rights in the future with the life interest. Most of the drones are actually flown out of Las Vegas right here. The guys walk down. As the recent leaks on the assassination program have shown, there's absolutely no due process when it comes to deciding who to kill. You just kind of throw the cards up, 52-card money, right? Just throw them up and, he landed in the wrong spot. Let's assassinate him with the drone with no due process or anything. And then, all the collateral damage, like when you blow up a Doctors Without Borders hospital, all that collateral damage, they get added ex post facto to the terrorist list and the assassination list. And so individuals, if there's going to be freedom, if there's going to be rule of law, it has to bubble up from the individuals. And economics are really the way that you're going to change society. Now, how did we as a society get into this situation? Well, it's actually not that surprising. You know, you look at Europe, you look at the map, you look at the United States, you look at the map, you look at the technology that we had, you look at the technology that we began to develop. It led to centralization. You needed large armies to project violence to protect your railroads and your coal mines and stuff like this. You know, it led to this naturally centralizing effect. Then Columbus, you know, he discovered the New World, right? Well, it wasn't necessarily that he discovered the New World. Lots of people would come to the New World. What did Columbus actually discover? He discovered the trade winds. He discovered the way that it made it economically feasible to now build out the New World. Okay? It's a very, very important point. And so what do we have with Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin uses this technology, asymmetric encryption, which was Diffie-Hellman from like the mid-70s. And anybody who looked at, you know, asymmetric cryptography and its applications economically can see that what it does is it drastically reduces the cost of protection and increases the costs for people to extort. Because at the end of the day, no amount of violence is going to solve a math problem, and my math is stronger than your math, so screw you. You got to use a lot of cycles in order to brute force it, you know, and it's just not feasible. And it's one of the reasons the U.S. is dominant is because, you know, our math is stronger than lots of other countries' math. And but, you know, that cuts both ways. Individuals, you know, now have access to this encryption. And Dr. Back, you know, he actually played a pivotal role. He made a T-shirt of, like, the encryption, and he's like, oh, this is free speech. And they printed a book, and it actually went to the United States Supreme Court in the mid-'90s, and it was ruled speech, protected under the First Amendment. You know, one of those amendments we think we hold dear in Western societies. You know, we think that, I guess we learned from our mistakes, you know, with Copernicus and Galileo under house arrest. You know, now we're pro-heliocentric theory societies, we're pro-calculus societies, we're pro, you know, science, and in order to have science, we had a Gutenberg press, and we had to argue ideas. We had to have a new way of arguing, and that meant that we needed ideas out in the public square. And when the ideas were in the public square, that, you know, sunlight was the best disinfectant, as the Supreme Court said. And so, you know, we're pro freedom of speech. That's how, you know, we've come up with lots of ideas, but on the other side, we have to deal with YouTube comments and stuff like that, right? But it's just all part of the process. Well, now, in the Citizens United case, Justice Scalia, he said, you know, money is speech. Oh, boy. In no, like, where else besides Bitcoin has money become speech? I mean, money is literally a number now. And by the way, if you don't know what an illegal prime is, the United States has actually made it illegal to possess particular numbers. Wow. You know, I mean, Islam did it with the zero. It held their civilization back for, you know, millennia. But, you know, I guess we have illegal primes, and if you're in possession of a certain prime number, then you can go to jail for a long time. I mean, it makes you wonder what else will be illegal. You know, if we're making numbers illegal, wow, yeah. So, I mean, you might need that number in order to discover, like, the cure to cancer or something. I mean, what do you do? Well, I guess society just labors under, you know, we have shortages. Hundreds of thousands of people die because we have shortages with the FDA not being able to get the drugs out. It would be interesting. I wonder what some of these regulators or law enforcement would do if the only way that they could get a life-saving medicine for their spouse or their parents was to buy it on Silk Road. I wonder if they'd do it. Or just let them die. I guess if they really believe in the system that they're upholding, that they would just let their loved one die. In Venezuela, it's actually, a big problem. They're rationing medicine and stuff like that. So it's very sad. But, all these policies have effects. And those effects cause human behavior to take place. And because of all of this intervention in the money and the currencies and the transmission of money and all this stuff, we've bifurcated value from price. They've interfered with interest rates to such a degree that we have no idea how to allocate production over time, which is what interest rates do. We have no ability to really do that. So everybody's just flying around completely blind. They don't have access to instruments that work, and even if their instruments do work, they're based on fundamentally false premises. When we're performing mental calculations of length, we have like yard and foot and inch, and they all have kind of definitions, right? It's in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, power to define weights and measures. Mental calculations of time, we have units like day and year and all this stuff. And, in the Constitution, president serves for 4 years. Well, we need to know what a year is, right? Like if it's undefined, then we would have problems in our law. And mental calculations of volume and other stuff. Well, the phrase dollar is used in the Constitution twice. And in case you didn't hear, the Constitution, it was debated, and one of the hotly contested areas was the slave clause, and the slave clause actually has the word dollar in it. And so since we have the director of the Mint here, maybe he can tell us what is a dollar. No answer? Yeah, so we had the thaler from Germany. It became the Spanish milled dollar, which was then circulating as the common medium of exchange. The 1792 Coinage Act actually defined it as 371.25 grains of fine silver. And so that was the definition of a dollar. I mean, it was a certain amount of metal, of a certain purity, and a certain weight. And then that allowed us to perform economic calculations. And also interesting, and I think Section 19, anybody who worked for the Mint, who debased or made worse the currency, shall be guilty of a felony and shall suffer death. So that was interesting. We were a little bit more serious about financial crime back then, I guess. So we had a definition of the dollar. But now, under 31 U.S.C. 5101 through 5118, the way we define a dollar is, we've got a certain amount of platinum is $1, and 1 ounce of silver is $1, and $50 is an ounce of gold, and Federal Reserve notes can also constitute dollars. But man, last time I looked at the periodic table, 50 ounces of silver did not equal 1 ounce of gold. I mean, that's just fundamentally unintelligible based on chemical law. I mean, it's like saying the speed of gravity is not, 9.2 or whatever it is, feet per second. I mean, it's just unintelligible. It's like, and that's part of the thing with math is you got to be right with it. You got the wrong private key. You're not moving the bitcoins. Doesn't matter if you have a nuclear bomb or not pointed at the blockchain. You got to be right. And so, we don't even have a definition of a dollar. Is it any wonder that the institutions and organizations that we build as a society, based on economic calculation and the division of labor, get so unstable and collapse and need bailouts and people die? How do they die? Because the price of a bowl of rice, you can now only afford 1 every day instead of 2. And so there's riots and there's civil unrest, and people die. There's no reason we should have any type of shortages in today's day and age with the technology that we have. It's absolutely absurd. Any shortage we have is purely caused because of the institution of the state, and we have 55,000 people that die in the United States on government-managed roads. If we had 55,000 people die on Delta or United every year, we would be outraged. And yet, because we aren't able to innovate in roads and in cars, in fact, there are particular safety devices that we can't even use because it's against the regulations. In Uber, Uber's a good example, and they only exist because of government regulation, but there was a study done, I guess something like 500 people otherwise would have died from drunk driving on New Year's Eve in San Francisco. No, 2 people, but extrapolated out to the U.S., it'd be something like 500 people. So, we look back at these ancient societies like, the Mayans and the Incas, and, they'd sacrifice people to the weather gods, and hopefully we'll have rain because we, killed our youngest generation, right? And yet, who here has had a friend or a family member either been seriously injured or killed in an automobile accident? Yeah, so vast majority of the audience. Based on Dr. Block's work, Dr. Walter Block, if the roads were privatized, we'd probably have between 10 and 12,000 people a year die. So 75% of everybody could have lowered their hand, and the people they care about could still be around. But instead, we sacrifice these people to the road gods, or we sacrifice them to the monetary policy gods, and we have shortages and rationing, and like this crisis in Europe, it's with all the immigrants. All this stuff has a root in the way that we as humanity perform economic calculation. And the way that we perform that economic calculation has been censored through the interest rates. And so Bitcoin's largest application, its most beneficial way of impacting society, might not necessarily be its censorship resistance for speech, but its censorship resistance for economic calculation as a way to route around the economic censorship that takes place in society. And we're already seeing it. Argentina, they love Bitcoin. It helps them route around their economic censorship. And the more draconian the policies, the more money that's at stake, the more arbitrage there is. They got an 85% spread on arbitrage, the hotel owners. It's really crazy. China's decided to start making it more difficult to move their money around. The Chinese, I bet they're loving Bitcoin. It just passed 2,000 yuan. Greece, Cyprus, Spain, Italy, Portugal. Eventually it'll be the United States, since we're ground zero, since we have the world's monetary system headquartered here. In the meantime, in this great credit contraction where we move from fiat currency and fractional reserve banking to 100% full reserves of private keys held by individuals, not just of their money, but also of their assets, all this hypothecation, rehypothecation that's taken place in our banking system, shadow banking system, people are going to hire Bitcoin. And, the first rule of panic is to do it first. Because all the wealth was destroyed when it was misallocated and moved up into this illusory liquidity pyramid. And so as safety moves down the liquidity pyramid into safer, more liquid assets, then, the system, it doesn't collapse, it evaporates. Auction rate securities that traded for 30 years at par, $1, all of a sudden they go no bid. Or they're bid 93 cents to the dollar, which is what happened in 2008. And that brings a very interesting question. At the tip of the liquidity pyramid, based on Exeter's liquidity pyramid, he was with the Federal Reserve, said we're eventually going to have a problem. What's the safest and the most liquid asset? gold. Gold has been for millennia. But last time I checked, I couldn't send gold over a communications channel. I couldn't use a microwave or a radio wave to teleport gold from one location to another location. To take the gold off of the Argentina server and move it to the Chinese server. Or otherwise turn it into a programmable asset. So these are all reasons that people are going to want to hire Bitcoin. The current system is done. If you look at the reverse repos held by the Federal Reserve, in 2008 it was about $60 billion. Something happened in the middle of September. We don't know what it is. I think it was probably related to Glencore and some of the other commodities dealers. But it spiked to $660 billion, 11, 12 times the size of 2008, the reverse repo agreements held by the Fed. Why is the Fed even involved in a repo agreement in the first place? Well, they're the lender of last resort, right? So as the Federal Reserve System shakes itself to pieces, because individual actors, they think they own something they log into their Wells Fargo account, they think they own something in there, or their Schwab account or whatever, they think they own shares of something. As it shakes itself to pieces because individuals seek safer and more liquid assets, it's either going to implode in a deflationary depression or it's going to explode into a hyperinflationary type environment. And that's where, Bitcoin could be a potential release valve. It could actually help maintain some continuity of society. I mean, what happens when all of our police officers realize that their pensions are done? Just poof. Just gone. I mean, anybody work for the Fed? Like, your pension's not safe. It's denominated in dollars. They're not defined. They're not even defined under federal law. And yet you're guaranteed a certain amount of them, right? It has very grave implications for our society, the cohesion of our society, and so hopefully what we are building are solutions to these problems. Because I think gold is one of the potential solutions, but if we think that we're going to sit on our hoards of gold and pet it or something, and everything's going to be fine as the world burns, because people have oatmeal in their brains, as Vladimir Putin says, because everybody's gone crazy throughout the world. Just last week he said the threat of nuclear force has lost a lot of its deterrence. Ooh, that should be chilling. He said that the bar for the use of violence has been lowered. A major world leader who had previously, a couple weeks earlier at the UN said that, what the U.S. is doing is unacceptable. We're not going to be part of this anymore. So they've been completely ostracized from the current system. They got nuclear weapons. Man. Whew. And the psychological effect of the Great Wars has largely worn off. That generation is, my grandma's that generation. It's going to be her turn pretty soon. She's about 88, 90 or so. We might need a refresher, or at least the neocons might think that we need one, which is kind of scary when you think about it, because whenever we create power centers, those who are the most depraved seek those power centers. That's one of the reasons the founders distributed the private keys of violence so widely, is because they realized that the craziest in our society will actually seek the power centers so that they can work out their nightmares of destruction on the rest of everybody else because they think it's fun or something. So the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Mussolinis, the Franklin Roosevelts, all made it illegal to hold gold, by the way. Executive Order 6102 from Franklin Roosevelt. They all, and if you don't do what they say, any Japanese people here? Yeah, U.S. put hundreds of thousands of you in concentration camps, and now they're building the concentration camps for all these immigrants that are coming up from Syria. So same song, second verse, right? So it's very worrisome. So why do we hire Bitcoin? We hire Bitcoin because we want to see a better world built. We hire Bitcoin so that we can not be so impacted by economic censorship that is threatening perhaps our entire species. Because this ability to govern our economic transactions by math is far superior to being able to govern it by laws of men, that are much more, I'll just keep an email server in my garage and leak all, not handle the classified information. Even those who seek the highest office don't respect the very laws that they've sworn to uphold and protect. But, when it's all open source and transparent and governed by the laws of math, then we all know, what the terms are. It's intrinsically limited. So these are all reasons that we hire Bitcoin. And with that, I suppose I'll open it up for questions and turn off the podcast.
All right, let's give Trace a great big
hand. Are we done, Steve?
Yes, we are.
Oh, thanks.
We'll do some questions. We've got a couple minutes. So, I just love hearing Trace speak because he doesn't mince words and he tells it like it is. So questions, we'll start with Steve here and then we'll work our way this way.
So Trace, I had an interesting experience in life. Over the last 20 years or so, I've been at the front edge of trying to help people address a much simpler concern, which has been around the context of cybersecurity. And what we learned in that process is that nobody actually cares. That fear as a motivator, while we can all in a room agree, how many people are comfortable that their cybersecurity today is better than it even was a year ago or 10 years ago? It's been a train wreck. And I would just say that I think Bitcoin using the concept of fear as a motivation to accomplish a new adoption of both technology, systems, infrastructure, and the most abstract concept has proven to be, certainly in the minor, you could call beta experiment of just pure concepts of cybersecurity, to be an absolute abject failure. The industry shipped 100% of all enterprise class PCs with a modernization of the security infrastructure. No one turned it on. But the investment was made, everybody got provisioned. It would be as though we gave one Bitcoin to 100% of the population. They go, what the hell do I do with this? And so I had an experience once with Terry Takayo, who was CIO of U.S. Office of Secretary of Defense, and she made a great statement, which was, don't try and scare me. Tell me what these new technologies can do to make my life better. And I think that in the context of your presentation, moving away from the fear context and explaining why, because I transact with Bitcoin, I will have a better experience, then behind the scenes, this fundamental social benefit can also be delivered. But the adoption for social benefit, other than the 3 crazy people who actually have real cybersecurity, who will most likely also adopt this, the rest of the population actually doesn't care. So think more like Snapchat and less along the lines of, how do I make everybody safe?
Any comments on that, Trace?
I think that you have to respect the private keys. Not all of the water buffalo make it across the river. We're moving into, and we're in the middle of massive currency war. It's bubbling into kinetic war. Vladimir Putin's already talked about nuclear war. Well, and They might, I mean, you have to weigh the cost-benefit analysis. Everybody's got a different way of looking at what's probable and what's possible and what the probabilities are, and they make their own economic calculations on how they want to secure themselves and their assets. My mom's got a saying, like, not my monkey, not my circus. The tools are out there. If you want to protect yourself, you can go download Armory. I mean, that's why I freaking funded it, so that people can hold the private keys themselves. And if you don't want to figure out how to do it, not my monkey, not my circus. And if your retirement goes poof, if your way of life gets destroyed, if you don't have a last plane account type situation set up where you can take the last plane out of your country, like where do you go, how do you maintain your standard of living, you know what? Maybe you never need that insurance, but you don't get to buy insurance after the fact. And insurance companies are probably going to be going poof in all of this. I mean, look at what negative interest rates have done to their earnings. Massive underfunding of pensions. Yeah, I mean, it's not my monkey, not my circus. There's 7 billion people. Everybody's got a different way of looking at the world. Do what you think's best in your own situation. I think it's a good idea to be conversant in the latest technology and know how to use it.
Hi. You mentioned Argentina several times, and Argentina has a very robust black market for U.S. dollars.
The blue market.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that? I think it's very decentralized, and I want to know if you think it's a good model for creating a robust black market for Bitcoin like Local Bitcoins is doing in the U.S.
Well, I don't think doing anything illegal is a good idea. But I can definitely see why people down in Argentina would do it, because the regulation increases the profitability of engaging in the behavior. So we see it in the war on drugs. We really see it anywhere that regulation touches. If it makes it more economically attractive, if you make more money doing it, then you're going to get people that are going to do it. So I personally wouldn't do it. I mean, I got too much to lose. I don't really care about picking up an extra $20 here or $30 there. But I could see where some people would care about that. And then it's just you have to weigh it yourself. It's an individual thing that you got to figure out.
All right, that looks like that's it. So let's give Trace a big hand. Thank you very much, Trace, for being